Yet? I sure am. Inspired to seek God and all that He has for us. We're going to do something a little bit different now. Ed and I are going to sit up here, and Ed Burns is just a fantastic man of God, businessman. He's got plenty of stories to tell of his own, but we're going to talk about professional communication, and I don't want to take too much away from Ed, but I can everything he's going to talk about I can agree with, because I used to interview interns. I used to see hundreds of interns go through their resumes, go over my desk, and you could just tell the difference between who might be a really valuable person to the organization and who may not be all that valuable, based on how they presented themselves in their communication, and even in job interviews and things like that. So we're going to talk a little bit about professional communication. Ed has written a book, and it's available.
Yeah, I'll have some in the back. It's called Why Won't They Hire Me? It was published in 2010. It's an interviewing and resume writing book.
So Ed, what are you doing right now? Give us a little bio on you.
So I've been at Living Hope Church 9 years. I've been in the corporate world 15, 8 years at GE, 3 years running an apparel company, and now I'm at Shell Oil. Last year I was ranked top 1% out of 93,000 employees.
That's pretty good. That's fantastic.
So yeah, I started out in a warehouse, kind of similar to what Denny was saying. Worked my way up through the ranks, but it's based on my communication skills that really the senior leadership at GE and Shell really said, I have a lot to offer, and so I've taken that and just kind of ran with it.
Cool. So can you give us just a real quick nutshell definition of what you're thinking of when professional communication?
So it's you incorporated. That's what professional communication is, right? It's business. It's who you are and who people see you are, right? Whether it be your boss, whether it be somebody comes in the front door of Living Hope Church, you are you incorporated. Who do you represent? What do you look like? There's verbal, there's nonverbal communication. What does that look like, right? And so professional communication is, if you work for a company, how does that company want you to represent the company? If you are serving in a church, how does Living Hope Church or whomever want you to represent their brand? So that's what I would say professional communication is.
That's great. So tell me, what are some of the issues in regard to communication that you see in just people, corporate, and Shell?
Okay. Well, 3 weeks ago, I'll give you a Shell example. Keep in mind, Shell is the world's largest employer. It's the world's largest company by revenue. They make $1 million an hour. So it's very well respected and well funded company. So we are all across the world. And so a couple of weeks ago, I oversee Shell Appalachia, materials management. And so I was overseeing a project in Bradford, Pennsylvania, and one of the people that report up through me, I'd sent her an email saying, listen, we need to work on this project, and this is what I need you to do. I laid it out. I took a lot of time to lay out this email and professionally communicate, right? And I got back a reply that said, LOL. LOL. For those of you who don't know, that's laugh out loud, right? And I literally had to just walk away for about an hour. I mean, if you know me, I'm pretty intense kind of person. And so I stepped back and said, LOL, right? So I immediately messaged my boss in Houston. I said, I just got an LOL message, on the request that he had given me to reach out to this person. And so that became a larger dialogue between myself and him. And he was saying, you know what, I'm seeing it too. I'm seeing a lot of this lack of professional communication that's going on, and gosh, we need to really do something about it. Well, I know what it stems from. I think we could all, LOL is texting, right? It's just made it so that our handhelds and everything, we don't have conversations anymore. We just don't. Everything's abbreviated, right? And I also interview people. I do career coaching also. So I see it. When you interview somebody, they don't look at you, right? They can't hold a conversation, especially some of the younger generation. They just can't hold that kind of conversation. So, in 2015, we've made it a priority in my business to work on professional communication with our employees.
So you've kind of talked about the concern. So somebody types back LOL, okay, that's just where we're going, right? That's just how we are. Should we, why is that a problem in the corporate world? Why shouldn't it just be accepted, and we should expect our bosses to just be okay with that?
Yeah, well, I think, especially in the case, the example that I gave, this woman who, is in a remote part of Pennsylvania, she still represents my organization. She's the face of my business. She represents me. She not only represents me, she represents my boss who's in Houston, his boss who's in Calgary, and Shell overall, right, globally. And so if I'm having that kind of dialogue or lack of dialogue with that kind of, with someone who reports to me, what is she doing with people who she doesn't report to, right? Her customers, my customers, right? There are 23 individual businesses within Shell. So from legal to finance to accounting to community liaison to materials management, so 23. So it would interact with approximately 16 other business units. It's extremely important because if we have some sort of problems internally within Shell, I can only imagine what externally, the kind of issues that she might generate because of that poor communication.
That's good. So it's a problem, you're representing someone else, like all of us, we carry the image of God and we represent him. So our actions are important. But the same thing goes, like I'm hearing you saying, the same thing goes to a degree at work, that when we're representing someone else, that, we need to act appropriately. And even, I like the example that you use when we're serving in the church, because, a lot of us, most people are not employed by the church. We're volunteers, but that doesn't change anything, really.
Right. So it was funny. Last week, Evan said to me, "Boy, you walk like an usher." I said, I am an usher. So that was a good thing, right? He knows I was an usher, but the sense being that, especially in a church setting, we are the face of Living Hope, right? And we really need to take our roles and the roles that we've, volunteered for really seriously. There are people coming in that we are the first impression of Living Hope Church. And so, we need to take that you incorporated that I talked about, what is, your brand, and then make sure it lines up with the Living Hope brand, obviously, which it would. And, make sure that we put our best face forward. You got to think about what you're doing ahead of time too. I don't just come on Sundays or whenever, there's usher duties. I really take time to think about, what am I doing today? How am I serving? What do I want to, what do I want that first face to see, in me? So we each, every one of us has a gift and a talent, right? And that's part of that you incorporated. You need to bring that up to the surface, right? Professionally, right? Because again, we want to grow the kingdom, right? That's the ultimate goal, is to grow the kingdom. And again, God put those gifts and talents in us. And I think that's exactly why he did it, to help grow the kingdom.
That's great. Yeah, and I think just since you're on that subject, that the church as a whole represents something even bigger than the church. So even all of the individual pieces representing the brand, if you will, right, of Living Hope Church, the church represents the larger, let me use the term brand of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So it all makes sense. So that's good. So what are some things that we can do? What are like maybe some quick wins that we could get to really rectify this, put some things in action?
So one of the main things is, and I've learned this, is mirror the communicator, right? Especially in a professional setting. I don't start any sort of emails or morning communication where I'm making jokes or anything like that. I want, especially when I'm dealing with senior leadership, I let them set the tone for the conversation, and then I mirror that. So, if somebody asks me then how my weekend was, I feel that they've given me an invitation to open up a little bit, right? So I'm mirroring that, and I say, oh, I'm good. How was your weekend, right? But you need to kind of gauge that on your own, right? Don't immediately try and set the tone, because you have no idea what that person's going through on the other side of the email or just in a general conversation. So that's one thing. Always err on the side of caution, right? Just when in doubt, kind of don't go there, especially if it has something to do with jokes or, the LOLs or the emoticon things. Just don't do that. I know it was one of the big things, pet peeves that my boss, who again I report in through Houston at the corporate level, he said one of his biggest pet peeves is the emoticon things. Because he is, he's a Marine, former Marine. Everyone I work with is pretty much a former Marine, and there's really no emoticons in the Marines. So they just want to know what's going on, right? They walk with a purpose, and and that's just the way it is. So kind of let that set the tone. The one thing I do though, and it's part of my You Incorporated, it's part of my brand, is that I always start out conversations saying good morning, because I know I could be very rigid in my communication, because I don't want to just say, this, and this. I want the human part of it. So I'm not saying like eliminate the human part of who you are. You can incorporate that in, but there's professional ways of doing it. And I always, the first email I send to my boss every morning is good morning. And he knows that that's part of my brand. So
that's good. I know I've caught myself writing an email, and then just before I send it, I go back and I look at the beginning, and I'm like, oh, I didn't even acknowledge that there's going to be a human being on the other side of this email.
Right.
So like, I got to go back and be like, hey.
The one thing I would say is and I would just kind of reiterate this, you have no idea what the other person's going through on the other side of that email. From a business perspective, personal perspective, we just don't know. I teach what I call a get out of debt club at Shell. And, the happiest people walking around those halls, when you get them in a room and you talk about, like, say, their finances or their career, when times are a little rough, they are in pieces. And so it's, it's so hard to believe that they're going through that, and yet they're so cheerful. So when I say err on the side of caution, you just don't know what people are going through. So just keep that aware.
So what about like some other forms of communication? Like you were talking about like the body of an email, but what if my email address is like curlyqzen at ymail.com, or like, what do you think
Death
about
Grip 360? Yeah. So
does my Facebook profile matter? Like how I get searched on Google matter?
Absolutely. So one of the things that, and I won't say for sure that Shell does this, but I'm pretty sure they do, is so a lot of companies are actually following up on Facebook, definitely on LinkedIn. So you have a resume out there that you don't even know about, okay? And they will check it. The first thing I do when I have a candidate that comes, I go on and see what their Google resume looks like, right? So I just do a search, right? I go on LinkedIn, and I have to say I've gone on to try and find them on Facebook, right? I want to know what this was. They're going to represent my company. They're going to represent me. So just be aware that there are people. It's out. Your personal resume is out there, right? So we're talking about verbal, nonverbal communication. That's nonverbal that's kind of out there, right? But yeah, just I've always, there's, again, how you act, how you dress, everything is communication. It's nonverbal, right? And one of the things I've always done, whether I worked at the warehouse, I started out at GE in a warehouse by myself. And the one thing I always had in my head was, I'm not here long. I'm not here long. I think God always said, I'm taking you somewhere. So I would always dress, yeah, I mean, I had to dress like I was in a warehouse, but I really dressed nice for working in a warehouse because I thought, I'm not going to be here long, you know? And so just remember that somebody is watching you, right? And it's not a bad thing that people are watching you because you're there to represent them, right? You're getting paid or you're not getting paid, but you decided to volunteer. And that volunteer, you check the box to say, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to represent Living Hope Church or whatever organization to my best abilities.
I think that's exactly, Casey, what you were talking about a little bit with the boxes and the belt and things like that. Just serving at that level is part of your brand, if you will. That's part of you incorporated. So that's great. So Ed, based on what you've seen, the successes and failures you've seen, if we were to put some of these things in place in our lives, if we were to change our email address to something a little bit more appropriate,
right,
clean up some of those Facebook pages and write those good emails, what impact would that have on our career, on our life, on things like that?
Yeah, so again, I would go back to, especially at Shell, the high ranking that I got was based on who I am, that you incorporated, right? So I wasn't always like this. I mean, it kind of evolved. And what I realized is that when you have a great brand that you're presenting to your company, right? They really want you to excel. They want you to be in front of more people to represent that company, right? And therefore, they'll give you more responsibility. And so a great example of this is, so over the past year, I was taken out of a role to put on special assignment. And during this time, I was kind of completely out of the loop on certain things that I used to be in the loop on, right? But I would still get phone calls from people saying, can you help me? And I would, no doubt, still help them. But the issue was this, is that they loved my brand so much that they didn't care if I wasn't even responsible for that anymore. They knew I was responsible, they knew I would get the job done, and they knew that I would communicate during this whole time. So it just creates this entire network of people that just kind of surround you and say, this is the person that I want to be, hang out with, or this is the person that I want to team up with on these certain projects or whatever. So career advancement is all about professional communication. Again, nonverbal or verbal. It is the key, not only that, but the hard work ethic. I mean, you combine those two together, that's an unstoppable force. I mean, the sky's the limit.
That's amazing. I know there's a proverb that says a good name is worth far more than gold. So, right. I mean, I think what you're saying is extremely important, extremely biblical. And so what should we do then? Like at 12 o'clock when we leave, what should we be doing right away to make some of these things happen? So
the first thing you need to do is practice, right? So there are certain things, and I think I put it in the handout, is what are some things that you should be changing, right? If I'm using abbreviations, or if I'm just hurrying off emails, or if I'm not really thinking about what I'm going to be doing on a Sunday as I'm serving, right? I just show up, then that's something immediately you can do. So just start making little changes. The second thing I would say is seek out a mentor. There has always been one person that I've identified in the organizations I've worked for at GE and especially at Shell that does something really well from a communication standpoint. And so what I've done is I've literally gone up to him and said, I want you to be a mentor to me. And we have this saying at Shell is, I need some coaching. And my boss tells me that all the time. He asks me because I know some things that he doesn't. He knows some things that I don't. And so his term is, I need some coaching on this. And I've come to use that on a lot of things, where I've gone to, certain senior leaders and say, listen, I know that you're an expert in this field. I just need some coaching on X, Y, and Z. And they love that. When somebody approaches you and says, I need some coaching, it's an honor. It really is an honor. So I would say, like, whether, again, if it's serving in the church, if there's somebody at church, it might not be like an usher to usher, or it could be somebody that serves in a completely different area than you're serving in. But if they have the right approach to what they're doing, seek them out. What do you do? How do you get prepared for a Sunday? In a professional standpoint, what do you do? Do you take additional classes? Do you take communication classes? I see your email. Like, notice how people's emails are. Their signature lines right at the bottom where they give their name and their signature. Is it full of smiley face? It's probably really nice, And so I've literally taken somebody's signature line and I've copy pasted it and replaced it with my information. It's like, because I wanted that. I wanted to represent what that person represented. So those are quick wins, but seeking out a mentor, find somebody. Again, it's an honor to be thought of as a mentor. So
I know if you were to just ask Pastor Keith for a couple minutes of his time for help or insight on something, I would just make his day. I know that about him. Like, he definitely gets a lift from people just asking those questions.
The one thing I wanted to make point of is, Pastor Keith mentioned about Tom Gressman was that he never had to ask him, twice about something. And sometimes Tom knew exactly what Pastor Keith was going to say or want him to do. And I really take that into consideration at work, right? I want my boss to I want to be the one that he doesn't have to follow up with me about. And part of my brand, if you ask my boss, is that Ed just does it. He frees me up to worry about the other 6 people that don't do that. And he's told me that before. He said, I always know that you're going to get things done because I never have to ask you about that. So be proactive in communication, be proactive in how you appear, be proactive, right, in 2015 on every level of communication.
That's great. That's great. Do you, does anybody have any questions? Anything that you want to ask, or?
When you talk about mirroring people, what if they go below that professional? How do you handle it?
Yeah, so I don't mirror that, obviously. So especially in the warehouse setting, right? So you know what a warehouse typically was like. And I spent, I think, 6 years in warehouse settings, and I always drew the line. There were many lines where they began to, go below the threshold where I knew it went below the professional line, right? So I would actually kind of separate myself from that and just completely, like Casey, I would honor the boss part of it, because sometimes my bosses were the ones that would kind of stoop to that level. But I would always, there are certain lines that I would never cross, right? And so it's hard. It's hard because, you're the only one person that's not participating, but I would just not participate in it. I mean, and that became my brand. They knew that there were certain things that they couldn't talk to me about, they couldn't bring up, because I'm just not going to participate in it, right? And so, honestly, some of the things got them arrested. In one of because they were stealing product, and not a little product, a lot of product, thousands and thousands of dollars, right? I knew something was going on, but I just couldn't, because I wasn't involved in it from the get-go. They wouldn't include me in, so I had no idea really what they were doing. It's tough, but that's where I really relied on God. I literally, when I was in the warehouse, and I would have days like that where I would just feel like I'm overwhelmed by the pressure of trying to become part of that group, I would literally hear God say, I got something better. Stay the course. I got something better. I would pray. I would pray and just say, hey, I know that this is not you. This is, whatever they're doing, you don't want me in that. You just don't. So I would go off, work with myself in the corner or whatever, but just kind of avoid that. But they would see, there would be like 2 or 3 people that would come around, and they knew that I was getting advanced and things like that in advancements up through the ranks. And so they would want to be like, oh, okay, well, he did things differently than everyone else and he's going somewhere. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to ask about person, because
Yeah.
I found this incredible with Casey when we would go meet people, guys who are very successful millionaires throwing around the F word. Like I was going outside, I thought that was shocking. And I was going to ask him in a bigger corporate setting, because these are more like, internet millionaires. In a bigger corporate setting, how is that viewed?
two different companies. So in the first large company I worked for, which I'm not going to say, that was okay, which was very surprising to me also. I thought at the warehouse level, it was probably pretty common, but when we went up through the ranks, it was still common, which I thought was a huge problem, right? At Shell, it is completely not common. I was surprised because I came from 8 years of this background where it was okay. And it not only just the swearing part of it, but just the yelling and screaming. I mean, just one business was it was okay to just scream somebody into tears, right? And beat our suppliers into submission. I mean, that's what we did. That's what we were trained to do. But at Shell, I can honestly say that it has been completely refreshing. I'm still shocked, and I bring it up quite often, that I have yet to run into any sort of some of the poor communication that I ran into in the past. I wouldn't change it for the world, because I've really seen, I think God has really blessed the fact that I didn't go that way, because I could have easily gone that way. And I think that was a real blessing to get out of that kind of setting. But yeah, I think that there is a blessing that because I didn't participate in it. So yeah.
We have a young lady who works in the study in Boston, and the owner is very belligerent and swears and belittles them, and everybody in the company actually. And like, how do you handle that? How would you suggest I handle that? I mean, would you just let a boss talk to you like that?
Yeah, actually, no. Now, keep in mind, I have 15 years in the corporate world. Starting out, I probably, I let some things happen to me, screaming wise and what have you. Them calling me on a Sunday and just screaming at me, where are my parts? And I would be like, I don't even work for you. There were certain people, because we worked at different businesses, but if you just pull the person outside of the environment that they're in, right? So let's just say they're in an office setting. I would just say take them out to lunch where you get like a clean playing field, like just a clear space, and just talk to the person and just say, really, I'm not comfortable with this. What's going on? Is there something? Because it could be something going on in their personal life or business. The company could be going bankrupt, or we don't know, right? But today, if that happened to me today, I would take that person out to coffee and say, let's talk about this, because I'm really not comfortable. And I'm guessing you want me to stick around, right? Because I'm about ready to head out the door. Because there's not a lack of jobs out there. Let me be very clear about that. I turn people away because I can't find the right people that are willing to work, that have that hard work ethic, and that can communicate. I turn tons of people away. So if that isn't the right setting, if that little, coffee break doesn't work, just let them know, listen, I have 1 foot out the door. Unless you make a change, I'm going to head out. I was there. So my second, I've had many career stints, but I ran an apparel company. I was director of U.S. operations. And so I did not get along with the CEO. I just didn't. And for 3 years, I put up with the belligerent, just bringing me down. And at the end of it, I honestly didn't even know who I was, right? And I knew she wasn't going to leave. So after talking, you know, I had some conversation with her, said, I don't think this is working out. We need to change some things. It didn't change. So I left. I really did. I didn't really want to leave, but honestly, she gave me no choice. Because I left, I got put in, you know, God placed me at Shell, which is my dream job. It's absolutely my dream job. So I would just encourage her to have that conversation. If it doesn't work out, you have to make the leap of faith. Put it in God's hands. I prayed a lot during those 3 years. Yeah.
I was just going to say, what I'm hearing is a lot about having personal integrity,
Mm-hmm.
and that really carries you. And it's lacking in the world today. It's really lacking. People sense it, even if they don't know what they're sensing. You know,
Right.
they get it. And I know I was in this situation in a former job where something was said about me that was like assassination on my character.
Right.
And at first, a couple of people believed it, you know, and it was terrible. And then they came to me and they said, you know, I thought about this, and I know you would never say what they said you said. You know, so it was just based on my character and integrity that you know, and it was such a relief, you know, because there was nothing I could say to them to change their mind. They came to that conclusion on their own.
That's right.
I mean, if there's anything we can teach our children,
It's,
you know,
yeah.
to have personal integrity.
Personal integrity is the number one thing. If you ask millionaires, and they've done the studies, what is the number one trait of millionaires? It's absolute integrity. And it's, from a career standpoint, it's one of the characteristics I tick the box if I'm looking for somebody is high integrity. Now, that's hard to do on, you know, to try and get on a resume. I mean, but that's why you have references, right? If you don't, make sure when you put or somebody, when you're seeking a job, you put references on, I'm calling them. I'm going to call them, I'm going to ask about 50 questions. Because again, you're going to represent me, you're going to represent my company. And so absolute high integrity is the absolute best thing.
My son just accepted a job, but he doesn't graduate until May.
Yeah.
So they haven't signed the contract yet, you know, so he intends to stick with that, but he said he knows, well, one of his friends accepted a job, and he goes, if something else comes along, he's just going to take the better one. He goes, but you signed the contract. He goes, oh, well, you know,
Yeah.
And I said, you know, but so there you go. I'm like, that's terrible, because there should be some integrity there that you
Yeah.
what you agreed to.
I could have easily, from that position where I didn't get along with the CEO, I could have easily gotten fired. Just, you know, come up with some random thing to say to the CEO, but I didn't, right? I knew that I had to wait on God's timing, and I just honored her as the CEO and just did my job. But to your point, I mean, the integrity thing is probably the biggest thing from a career standpoint that you can have that level there.
Last one then.
Let's talk about calling references. I know a lot of times we call references. They're so vague. They
Yeah.
don't answer them quite. They say, yeah, he used to work here, and that's about all you can get out.
Yeah.
Any strategies or techniques to try to,
Well,
would you rehire them? A lot of it's because of the liability issues. They don't give you much information.
yeah, so you almost end up interviewing the reference, which is kind of sad, right? But there are certain questions, you know, I don't use any open-ended questions when I talk to the references, right? Yes, no things, I avoid that. Tell me about how he or she worked in a project. Did they get along with people? So what did they do to your bottom line? You know, what was the one characteristics about this person that stands out? When I mention his or her name, what is that one thing that stands out? And, you know, I would just kind of keep those kind of questions flowing. And if it continues to be something where you're not getting a whole lot of information, that person needs to move on, right? And because that's that nonverbal communication, right? That's that you incorporated. If you don't have any stories, if I'm trying to pull teeth to get a story, to get your background, to figure out who you are, I don't have that kind of time, right? I'm going to move on to the next person. And so, unfortunately, you know, I think the only thing you can do is move on to the next candidate. But I'll bring the candidate in, and maybe I can get a little bit more information, because like you said, the references might be, half the time they're busy themselves. They don't have time to sit down and talk to me. They don't want to be interviewed by me. All right, so I bring the candidate in, and so some of the things I put in the book are the questions that really bring out some of the characteristics. There are people that have a high amount of integrity, but can't communicate it to you about their accomplishments. And so I'm able to sit down with them and pull that information out, right? Tell me about a project. Like I said, tell me about a project you worked on. What frustrated you in this last job? What did you like, right? Tell me about like some things that are outside. Do you volunteer? I'm real big on resumes that I want to see what they volunteered with, because that tells me really where their heart is, right? So when you start talking about what they do outside of work, sometimes that pulls some characteristics of integrity out. They might have been in a really bad personal situation over the past couple of years. And so again, when you start bringing in the personal aspect of that interview discussion, you'll realize that they've been going through a lot. And so maybe their head just wasn't in the right place. But before that, you know, they were an incredible employee with tons of results. I would really just encourage, again, not really relying so much on those references, but bring the employee in, and you could Google some of the, you know, great interview questions, right? And list them all out and have like 5 or 6 ready, or even like 10. I've had interviews that have lasted 2 hours because I was fascinated by the person. You know, on paper, they didn't look so hot, right? But it takes a lot to really make a good resume. It really does. And again, some people don't know those techniques, but once you get them in the setting, boy, all of a sudden you realize that they're far more than what's on paper. So you got to pull it out. It takes some time. Again, that you're relying on your professional communication to bring their communication out.
You know, you mentioned volunteering, and I know that LinkedIn, if any of you are on LinkedIn, there is a section for volunteering. And if you don't have, like, you know, run the coffee bar, or run the kitchen, or, you know, and things like that, you should put that on there, because that,
Yeah.
I mean, you may be, you know, button pusher at work, but you run this at church. I mean, like, that's a big deal. But then at the same time, they might call me and ask me how well you do it.
Well, and that goes back to the professional communication of serving, right? So we need to just have it on the you incorporated of serving, the you incorporated of your professional life.
Well, thanks so much, Ed. That's been fantastic. We're going to take a break. Ed's got his book. We're going to, you know, you can ask him about it and whatnot. We'll start up again in 10 minutes. So we'll see you then.
Thanks. Sure.